Flashing? I'd really like to get finished with chapter 1. I'm supposed to be in chapter 4. Oh well.
Good luck with that.
So is life. I didn't restart numbering, so I don't know. It's supposed to be session 2, but look, we're just going on, okay? We're moving along as quickly as we can in a reasonable fashion. All right, these are the words of the day for chapter 4, so that's okay. SP. That's very good. Get a better one. Spermaton. Spermaton. We get the word sperm and spermatozoa from it. And this is one of the words used, and it's really amazing. The words that are used in the parables of the sowers, there's 3 in a row. They're all different words that are used, and that's what I'm trying to show you. When we get there, I'll give you specifically the differences. But spermaton is used when it talks about the mustard seed. And it has the same meaning for us as it has for the Greeks. So just keep that in mind. Synappeos. Synaptos, or synapitos. Let's see, synepe. Synepe meaning mustard. Mustard comes from, in Greek, it means to sting. So a mustard plant, a proper mustard plant, will make your eyes burn. And by the way, wasabi doesn't come from wasabi. It's usually mustard, not wasabi. Because wasabi costs as much as gold per ounce, from what I understand. B-A-L, and if you know what I'm talking about, you don't obviously do sushi. So, balo. Balo means to throw. Balo is one of those primary words, and we see it often, especially in Mark. It's a very simple word. And by the way, Mark uses very, very simple words in the Greek, but it's interesting how he chooses the words. And this is what I've said before. We're going to see more and more examples of where the words digress from Matthew. So if you go back and look at your Matthew study that we did before, you'll see the words that Matthew uses are completely different from the words that Mark uses. And Mark tends to use much more simple words in the Greek, which is interesting. Where Matthew uses very complex words, Greek complex words, and uses totally different words. So where we translate them, this is what I've got at before, we translate the parable exactly the same, but in Greek they're completely different. Because the words that are chosen are different. And even the contexts are different, but we'll see more of that. A-N-T-H-R-O-P-O-S, atopos. This is a word we see all the time in the Greek and especially in Mark. But atopos means man-faced. From the 2 words, I think I gave it to you, aner, which means man, and faced. Faced is, let's see, what's the word? Opos. And by the way, remember, optio, the word used, military word used by Mark to describe when he called Peter. We'll get in more in that. G-E-S, gay. Gay is a negative part in Matthew. It's not negative in Mark. The difference, though, remember, Matthew, written probably more toward a Hebrew audience. I mean, this is really something that people don't seem to understand. But we see Mark is very obviously written to Greek and Romans. Where Matthew is written, well, if you remember our study, it was very obvious that Matthew was talking a lot about Hebraic concepts. And gay is a very negative Hebraic concept. In Mark, not negative. And I had to add this one because I can't miss it. We'll get to it eventually because we'll see it. Mysterion. Because a mysterion is not a mystery, but rather a mysterion is a type of religious thing in Greek thought. And we'll see it. But I want to get right away into, let's go to chapter 1:21. And what I'll do is, let me see. Okay, here's a map. Okay, here is the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee. And it goes down the Jordan River to the Dead Sea. Dead Sea. And these are seas, they're called seas. However, the Sea of Galilee is salt or fresh? Fresh. This was really important when we were talking about the disciples. Tiberias is right around here, and Capernaum is right here. You remember the problem with Tiberias? Anybody remember the problem with Tiberias? Tiberias is built over tombs. And Herod built Tiberias over tombs. I mean, I'm not going to go into the great details about the problems with Herod, but it's interesting that in the New Testament, nobody goes into Tiberias because it's over tombs. What's the problem with going over tombs? We're going to get to this eventually. Unclean, yeah. How can you go to a city, you walk into the city and you're unclean, which means in their period you could not eat teruma. And this is an interesting question. If you couldn't eat teruma, teruma is when you took your sacrifice to the temple. And 90% of the sacrifices you took to the temple, you did what with it? You ate it. You shared in it. You know, we have this very false concept of temple worship that you bring your sacrifice and what happens to it? It's burned up, right? That is not true. 90% of what you brought to the temple, as a matter of fact, your 10% you brought to the temple, what did you do with that the tithe you brought to the temple? No, you ate it. 10%? Yeah. The 10% you brought. If you remember the Torah study we did, the Malachi study we did, Malachi cursed them because the priests did what with the tenth, the tithe? Okay. They took it and kept it. When what the Bible says you're supposed to do with the tithe is eat it. Right? You take your tithe and you bring it to the temple and then you eat it. That's the point of the tithe. And so we have this very false concept that when people brought the tithes to the temple, they were doing what with the temple? Giving it for the temple and the priest. That's wrong. That is incorrect. That is completely non-biblical. And I do not know why we've got this idea, because that is nowhere in the Bible. That is not in the Bible at all. As a matter of fact, what did they have to do for the upkeep of the temple during, what's his name? The guy who discovered they discovered the scrolls during his time. Josiah. During Josiah's time. And Josiah found that the priests were doing what? They were stealing the money that was for the temple, right? And so what did Josiah do? Josiah put the trumpets in the temple. He put special boxes, which were called trumpets, which were trumpet-shaped. So you put your money on the top, and they were locked, so that who could get the money out? The king. The king. Now this is interesting. Were you furnishing the king, or were you taking care of the temple? Who knows? You know, after Josiah, who knows what happened? But the priests were stealing the stuff, and Malachi told the priests in that, when we studied that, they were stealing the tithe, because the tithe was supposed to go to the people. When you brought your tithe into the house of the Lord, of the temple, you ate it. You sacrificed and ate it. That's continuous to the Old Testament. You did not give it for the temple. That was special stuff. That was extra. Yes, sir?
Wasn't there a special tax or something for the maintenance of the temple and the priests? Back in Exodus? I can't remember for sure.
It was if you want to say a tax, it was not a tax. Moses asked the people to bring of their own free will. And Josiah asked the people to donate of their own free will. Now, we are not sure what happened during the period of Christ, but there was a temple tax. Remember that? Jesus paid the temple tax. And that could only be paid in money, it could only be paid in Jewish money, which is very interesting. That's why there were changers in the temple. And by the way, you can only buy your lamb and your sacrifices from the temple. They already had a gig set up because the priest approved them, see? So there was a temple tax, and Josephus doesn't give us clarity on how that happened, because Josephus wrote about that. It's not in the Bible sources. It was probably set up in the Maccabean era. So who knows? But you know, there are in Jesus' time we know about the trumpets, right? Remember he made the comment about the widow's mite, right? The reason they're called trumpets is because, like I said, they look like trumpets. Edersheim writes about the temple when they look back at the temple information. these strong boxes were shaped like trumpets. And the reason they're shaped like trumpets, why? No, could you hear it? When you put the money in, you could hear the money as it went down. It's kind of like those things they have, where they're little ringy things that you let the kids run the money in. It runs down. These things were shaped like trumpets, and the money had a lockbox, so once you put it in, it couldn't get out, and when you put it in, it made a sound. That's why Jesus knew that she put in 2 mites, because you heard it go. Mites, the lepton, were iron. So what does iron sound like when you put it on in a brass box? Clonk, clonk. So he knew she put in 2 mites, see? Because when the rich guys came in, they put in gold or silver or whatever they put in, and they would, you'd sling it in. Dong, dong, dong. Because, it's gold and silver on brass. Try it. You can't. We don't have gold and silver money anymore. What? Our money's made of junk, right? It's not even, I don't know what they make it out of. Uranium. Who knows, Who knows what the money is made out of anymore? But in the old days, they made money out of real, worthwhile commodities, like gold and silver and copper. Today, we don't make it out, don't let your kids eat pennies, they'll kill them. There's zinc in something, So, the big deal is that, they had that method of supplying for the temple. And that, supposedly, the guy that had the key at the time was, we knew who had the key at the time of Jesus. Who had the key in this period?
The high priest?
No, the Romans. Because we know that Pilate for years wanted to use the money from the temple tax, or the temple money, to build something. And he did. He ended up building an aqueduct for him. And they got really irritated about that. But, what do you want? Clean water or not? What's your choice, right? So anyway, they used that money. And then they had the temple tax. We're not sure when they got tacked on. We know Josiah's period, we got the temple box. And then everyone was supposed to be bringing their tithe, their 10%. But when you brought your 10%, you were sharing in the meal of the deity. And that's what they shared. That's what the Mysterion shared with Judaism. Because in the Mysterion, you sacrifice to share a meal with the deity. And by the way, we do the same thing. What do we do? No, we have our sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving, the communion, which the communion is our Mysterion meal with the deity. It ain't changed. In the day it was a sacrifice. It is still. We call it the sacrifice of praise and thanksgiving. We even have a song. It comes out of the Didache. In any case, in 21, they went to Capernaum. Remember, militaristically, Jesus went to where John turned himself in. John turned himself in, it says. He turned himself in. And by the way, this is a big deal for John because he just went to Tiberias, and Tiberias is unclean. But he turned himself in for some reason. And Jesus followed him, which John is like, hey, you idiot. I just turned myself in. I made the road straight for you. And you're doing what? But Jesus continued his message. In any case, they went to the Capernaum when the Shabbat came, the Sabbath came, which is, by the way, Friday after the sun sets. Jesus went into the synagogue. Synagogue is a Greek term. It means to bring together with a leader. And it's the word used by the Jews since the time of, when do you think they got synagogue?
Babylon?
What's that?
In Babylon?
Probably not, but because remember Babylon, it was not Hellenized at the time. During the Hellenization is when they got the word synagogue, and it probably happened, you take your pick. In Egypt, probably not in Babylon, probably not in Jerusalem or the Galil. So I'm betting on probably Egypt, maybe during the Maccabean period. In any case, they went to Capernaum and they went to the synagogue and began to didasco. And we already talked about it. We'll see what it says. In 22, the people were amazed, epleso, struck motionless at his didache. Didache. And I made this comment to you yesterday, or last time we met. In didache, what is the didache? The didache is a book of instructions. May have been written before Mark. I'm betting it was written before Mark. It was probably written before Matthew. How do we know it may be written before Matthew? What is a characteristic of the didache that is not anywhere else except in Matthew? The Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer is in the Didache. And there's a huge question, there's been a huge question about whether the Lord's Prayer was written first in Didache and made its way into Matthew, or was written first in Matthew and made its way into Didache. We have evidence that Didache is an earlier work than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, anything. And Pauline letters. So, take your choice. He uses the word specifically Didache. And if they have the Didache, what is this? Okay, remember, we see in Mark two really important, well, we see a really important word that Mark throws out all the time. What's that word? We can barely go a phrase without seeing tin hodos thrown up again. And we're going to see it over and over again. Why do you think you would use Didache? If the Didache existed and he's writing to Romans and Greeks, he's telling them that Jesus gave them the Didache. That's why I use that word. Or, remember, he has lots of words. Does Mark use the word Didache? No. Matthew. Matthew does not use the word Didache or Didaske, because this is more commonly used when talking about two Greeks and Romans. However, like I said, especially in this context, because the Didache is most properly called the Didache, or the teaching of the 12 disciples. So we got the 12 disciples, we got the Didache. In any case. 22, the people were amazed because he taught them as one who had authority, exousia, mastery, and delegated influence, not as the grammateos. We've been through that. We're going to keep seeing this grammateos. We do not see the words Pharisees and Sadducees used the way we see it in Matthew, which tells us a lot. It tells us that he's not writing to Jews at all. Okay, let's move on, because we kind of hit these before. 23. Just then, a man in the synagogue who was possessed by and we're going to see this over and over again, akathartos pneuma. Akathartos. Catharsis. You guys know what a catharsis is, right? You usually have a catharsis when you're ill. Purging. You can purge from either direction. It's the same thing in the Greek. In the Greek thought, as a matter of fact, we don't think of it this much anymore, but what did they used to do to try to heal you in the Middle Ages? They gave you purgatives, right? To purge. Yeah, and by the way, what did they try to treat people with whooping cough? They probably kill more kids with whooping cough than, what did they give them for whooping cough all the time in the old days?
Castor oil?
Not castor oil, you're close. Epicac. What does Epicac make you do? Vomit. Yeah, they made these kids, they thought they had to purge out the phlegm, and they probably kill more kids than, by doing that, because it's horrible. America, if you read Annie of Green Gables, Annie was so smart because she gave Epicac to her friend's, one of her friend's name's brother, that supposedly saved his life. Well, probably prolonged his illness, but that's what they thought. They thought by purging, purging either direction, like if you had a stomach ache, we'll purge you, right? If you had a whatever, purge you. That was the thing. And, that's the way science, well, not so much science, that's the way, the myth of how to cure people, right? Let's talk about curing people. Well, we're going to get this in a little bit, but let's talk about this, okay? In the ancient world, when you were sick or something was wrong with you, what caused it?
You've done something wrong.
Yeah, you've done something wrong. In Hebrew culture, you've done something wrong against God with a big G. But in the pagan culture, in the Greek culture, you've done something wrong against the little g gods, right? Or the nymphs, or whatever else. You brushed against a tree and broke off a branch, right? Or you pulled a fruit out of its time, right? Without giving the proper dispensation. Or you didn't give the proper libation when you drank, right? Any of these things could get you in trouble with the gods. And if you were sick, the gods had cursed you. And therefore, did they treat illness?
No.
Not at all. We do not have a clue. They did not treat people who were ill. There are no medicines in the magic world of the ancients where they gave medicines to cure people that were sick. When a person was sick, you didn't get near them. Why? They were cursed. Okay? We know this is true because of the Asclepions. In every city that had Greek influence, and you could say what this about the Greeks. The Greeks had what kind of thing for people? They were compassionate. Because in the rest of the world, what did they do if you were sick?
They kicked you out.
They kicked you out. Yeah, at least the Greeks did what? They had a temple that you could go to. You know, when your kid was sick, you take him to the temple and leave him there. And if the kid survived, recovered, then you could praise Asclepius, right? But otherwise, if the kid died, and by the way, Asclepius, that's where the snake, you know, the snake symbol comes from, is Asclepius. That's the medical symbol. Because Asclepius was supposedly a real man who didn't treat illness. What did they treat in the ancient world? If you broke your leg, right? Because why? You know, well, when did most people get injured in the ancient world? What's that? Well, working or fighting. In the most common injuries you got, you were fighting, right? You were fighting. And so if you were injured on the battlefield, then they would treat you because you're a hero, right? Unless it's in your back, I guess. You know, when you were injured, you would be treated because you could see it. You know, it was something caused. You know, now maybe if you were like shearing the sheep and your sheep knife slipped and you cut yourself, someone might go, "You idiot," right? It's the fate of the gods. But, you know, if something happened to you in general, then you could see it. It's kind of like, you know, modern medicine in Canada. You know, if you have cancer, you're going to die. But if you got a bear mauled you, right? I see what happened to you. I can treat you. See? So, you know, if it's something that's going to cause a problem to the system, well, you know, it's like socialized medicine. You're going to die. But in, you know, socialized medicine, if you got something I can see, childbirth, right? Or an injury, wow. You know, the military has the greatest burn, trauma units, and childbirth units in the world. U.S. military. Why? Because it's obvious, right? I can take care of it. But they have the worst cancer treatment in the world. People die of cancer all the time in the military because, well, you know, we don't want to spend any resources on you. So, you know, you don't take care of it. That's really true. But anyway, I mean, we've had friends that died because they didn't treat them for cancer properly. Because they don't, you know, you're a resource on them. And then something happens in Canada, it happens in Britain, it happens in countries that have socialized medicine. That's the way it works. But if you have something I can see, you take care of it. The ancient world is very similar. If I see something that's obvious that I can treat, you know, you're bleeding, right? Well, let's sew it up and take care of it. It works. It's it's kind of it's not that modern a thing. And anyway, so a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an akathartos pneuma. I guess I always have to remind you. Remember sarx, suke, and pneuma. Pneuma. Sarx, suke, and pneuma. Pneuma is the spiritual part, the soul. We call it the soul. The Greeks said this is the unconscious breath. Did I say that right? Pneuma is the unconscious or conscious breath. I think it's the unconscious breath. Suke is the conscious breath because you have to think to do it. And sarx is the body. Don't get it all messed up. The Greeks had funny words for it because the Greeks were very concrete. To the Greeks, everything was concrete. So even when you start talking about stuff that we would call spiritual, right? To them, it's absolutely concrete. So suke means you're thinking thoughts. Where pneuma means the spiritual nature of a person. In any case, this guy had a akathartos pneuma. And he screamed out, he cried out. It's anaktareza. We'll see this over and over again. It means to scream like a raven. So he screamed in 24, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" Now this is really interesting. Why is this interesting? Because Jesus' correct name is Jesus of Nazareth bar Joseph. Jesus bar Joseph from Nazareth. That's like, okay, in the old ancient world, did you have a last name? No, your last name, well, people that are Scottish or Irish or people from Sweden sometimes, right, or even Germany, because there are some names like von Richthofen, von Bern,
John's son.
John's son, right? John's son. O'Brien means son of Brian. Okay, what's the Scottish thing? That's Irish. Scottish has one too. Huh? Mac. Yeah. McIntyre. You know, son of Mac. Or son of Tyre. Anyway. So, in the ancient world, you were known by who was your father. So, Jesus bar Joseph. And where you came from. And this guy knows what? His whole name, basically. Jesus of Nazareth. Have you come to aplome, destroy completely us? I know that you are the Hagios of God. The sacred being of God. Hagios. Hagios, you just call him a what? A demigod. Yeah, you just call him God. Basically a demigod. But and this is really interesting because this is a beginning point. And then anyway, he goes into the synagogue, and the first thing out of a guy who's demon possessed. Now, you might ask the question, why is a demon possessed guy in a synagogue? It could either mean that there's what? Lots of people that have issues, which sounds like modern era anyway, right? So, or maybe this guy, you know, I mean, obviously Jewish, right? Or they wouldn't let him in synagogue. Or no, it could be Greek. Unlikely in Capernaum. But in any case, says, this is very interesting. It's important to note that, what is this? Okay, let's say this guy is possessed kind of like by a demon thing, right? So what is evident about this demon thing?
It recognized him.
It recognized him, but it didn't have any idea what he was doing. Look what it says. What do you want with us? What do you want with us? Have you come to destroy us?
Lionel, who's speaking? The man or the possession?
That's a great question, because it says, just then a man in the synagogue, 33, who was possessed by a kathartos pneuma, cried out, screamed like a raven, screamed, what do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Now, if it's from the man, maybe he's been reading Noah, right? If it's from the demon, well, I say, who cares? It's probably both, or maybe one or the other. You give your choice. The point is, the demon doesn't know what, or the man doesn't know what. I mean, obviously, this guy has more knowledge than everybody else. See? But I think what we should recognize is that in Mark, according to Mark, did the demons know what Jesus was about? They had no clue. But they knew who he was. See? What kind of is, from a Greek standpoint, this is a logos to telos. Why is this a logos to telos? You have a direct witness. And so to the Greek audience here, Mark is doing what? Giving you proof of the divinity of Jesus.
Little g God is talking to the big G God.
And I think that's important to note. Because now he hasn't done it yet. We'll see what he does with this. But, in our view, in the ancient world view, what could be possessing this guy? What evil thing could be in this guy? An unpurged spirit. even from a Hebraic standpoint, who would be possessing this guy? Well, let's do it this way. Right? Or one of his. Now, it's interesting because I think that the ancient world, the people are much more consistent than we are. Because, you know, what's your pick? Well, most of us would say we don't believe in gods, right? A lot of us would say we don't believe in Satan, which I think is kind of interesting, because Jesus did. And a lot of us would say we don't believe in demons. What's the difference between Satan, gods, and demons? I'd say nothing. Okay? Nothing. Doesn't matter. Okay. If there are spiritual forces that oppose God, doesn't matter what you call them. No. There are spiritual forces that oppose God. And I think the ancient world was more clueful of this than we are. Because, you know, we get to this point and what do? We punt. If you punt this issue, what happens to spiritual things? They go away. This is what C.S. Lewis said. C.S. Lewis is a crack-up. You should read, I think it's Mere Christianity. I can't remember which one he writes. But he writes, you know, if you have a spiritual theme in a book, what does that mean you automatically have to have? God. If you have a spiritual thing, let's say you have a vampire in a book. Has anyone ever read the original vampire book, the Dracula? You know, the original? Without being expurgated by the SAS. The Scholastic, book services have purgated that book. That's one of their favorites to purgate because half of the book is prayer meetings and praying, if you didn't know. It's a really long book, but they shorten it to about 300 pages from 600 because they want to get all the God stuff out of it. Because, as C.S. Lewis says, if you write about vampires who are affected by crosses and prayer, then what do you have to automatically acknowledge?
God's powerful.
God, right? If you write about the gods, then your first question would be, who created the gods? Because the gods couldn't even answer the question. The Greeks couldn't answer that question. Who created the gods? Right? I got all these gods, but who created them? Well, I don't know. I think that's a pretty important question, don't you? But in Hebraic thought, and in Judeo-Christian thought, there was a creator who created everything, including these guys. Just a thought. Anyway, so he just called him a demigod. And 25, Jesus said, "Be quiet, come out of him." The evil spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. So, this is Mark's first argument, first logos to tell us. What does this logos to tell us? Tell us about Jesus.
He controls the demigod.
He is in control of these guys. And guess what? I think it's amazing that the very first point that Mark makes, what do you think the point is going to be through the rest of Mark? Well, an expansion of this. An expansion of this power. Because as we've rightly noted, remember I told you, the main theme of Mark is that Jesus has power over the gods. He's in opposition to the gods. And when we say gods, throw them all in that group. God, Satan, demons, your choice. You pick it. It says in 27, the people were so amazed, thambeo, stupefied. They asked each other, what is this? A new didache. A new didache? And with exousia. He even gives orders, epitasso, arranges in an orderly manner. I mean, I think it's really interesting. The word is epitasso. Epitasso is what a steward does to a household. In other words, he orders, he puts in an orderly manner the gods. That's what he's saying. It says to evil spirits, akatartos pneuma, and they hupakeo. They hear under. They are subordinate. This is the word, by the way. Hupakeo is the word that if Jesus, if in the New Testament they meant that women should be submissive to their husbands, they would use hupakeo. Because hupakeo means to listen under. In other words, to hear under. So you don't speak, you listen. So in other words, he told the evil spirit to be quiet, to shut up, and then told him to come out. And so what basically this is saying is he puts the spirits in an orderly manner. In other words, he kicks them out of humankind, right? He takes away the curse. And you can read this lots of ways. I mean, in classical Christianity, what's the curse? Original sin. Now, the Hebrews don't believe in original sin. But he just got rid of the curse, right? Let's go on. 28. Like I said, I like to do this. News about him spread quickly throughout the whole region of Galilee, of the Galilee. And you know what's really funny? You know, we hear about Galilee, and what do we think? It's a city, it's a little place. No, Galilee is huge. Galilee goes all the way down to Judea. If you look at your Bibles and your map, basically Galilee is this, well, this area. I should separate it like this. This is the Galilee. The Galilee. That's the Galilee. And this is Judea. Judea. And see, this is, it starts with P, I can't remember. This is the Decapolis. Decapolis. And that'll become important. Future. Anyway, news about spread. And as soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Now this is interesting, okay? Simon's mother-in-law is literally Penthera, his wife's mother. So that means that Simon had a wife, was in bed with a fever. And the word is puresso. And this is, by the way, the same word used in Matthew. Puresso means, and I should have put you in this, it means to be on fire. And it comes from pura, which means fire, but specifically lightning. Pur, P-U-R, from the word fire that means from lightning. This is a curse of Zeus. Now the fire, Hestia didn't bring fire. Hestia, the fires are lit for. But that's a good put together. Because Zeus was the one who creates fire through lightning. This is probably how the Greeks, now this is interesting. Who knows how this got? But you know, how did man get fire? You know, the theory or the Greek kind of thing is that the fire originally came from lightning. And that's the basis of the word pure in Greek, is that it came lightning-based fire. Now, when they lit the fire, you know, after that, where did they light the fires for the temple? They always lit the fires in the temple with the sun. They would use a big shield, and they would, you know, shined up shield, and they would use it convectively, and they would shine the light into a point until it caught fire. And that's the way they would make the light of the fire for the temples in the temple thing. And by the way, that's the same way they do it now for the Olympics. They're doing the ancient way they did it. But fire originally came from Zeus and was stole by Prometheus, right? The whole myth thing, if you remember that. But in any case, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with cursed by Zeus. And they told Jesus about it. Now, why didn't Jesus see her? She was isolated in the Gynoseum. Even in, you know, this is, you know, was this middle class, upper class home? Who knows? She was locked away. So he went to her. Now this is a big deal. Because he's going into the Gynoseum. He's going into the quarters of the women. Not allowed by a free man. So he goes in and, you know, number one, she's cursed by Zeus. But he goes into her. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, you should look at this with a historical viewpoint. Why didn't they kick her out? She's cursed by Zeus.
He has power over the gods.
Well, you get two reasons. Number one, they're Hebrew. So even if she's cursed by Zeus, and they would acknowledge, look, the word they use, she's cursed by Zeus, right? This is probably the word they used to Jesus, because we find it both Matthew and Mark. Perisso, she's cursed by Zeus. So they acknowledge she's cursed by Zeus, but they were, they had compassion. So Simon Peter, probably for his wife, I mean, look, you're going to kick out your mother-in-law? Right? That's the right thing to do. But he had compassion. And because they obviously were trusting in who? No, in their God. In Yahweh. See? Yahweh. They didn't expect this Jesus guy. They weren't trusting in this Jesus guy. Who's this Jesus guy? Do they believe he's the Christ? No, they have no clue. See, we read this like we know it, right? We know that Jesus is Christ. That's what we affirm, right? We've been convinced. But are they convinced? No. That's the whole point of Mark, is to convince you. See? So in the beginning, read this like you have no knowledge at all. So the disciples have no idea who this guy is. Just this guy, And so they see him do something. He obviously has some kind of power. This is kind of cool. But he goes in, he took her, grasped her with strength. He, kreto, grasped with strength her hand. And helped. He, egerio. He raised her up. And the puretos, the curse of the gods, literally the fever curse of the gods, left her. And she began to diakone. Diakone. She ministered to them. Egerio is that word that I've told you before. When you say egerio nekros, it means raised from the dead. But egerio just by itself means to raise you up. To raise you up. So he raised her up. Let's see if it says more. I think it has more in here. It says, the point, okay. Mark just showed us that he has power over the gods, right? The demigods, the gods. Because he cast out this evil spirit, this unpurged creature thing. Now he just showed he has power over.
Physical stuff.
Well, see, they don't believe it's physical.
Zeus.
It's Zeus. It's specifically Zeus. We're going to see over and over again the power over Zeus. Why would you want to show power over Zeus?
Because he's the main god.
Yeah, he's the head of the pantheon, right? So if Jesus has power over Zeus, what does he also have power over? All the other gods. So, we read this in our blinders. Our blinders are what? We are, we've got 2,000 years of blinders we got on. Because, we don't think, do you ever think about Zeus? What about these guys? They thought about Zeus so much that they said that his mother-in-law was cursed by Zeus. See, they have no idea about microbes or bacteria or, viruses or fevers, right? They don't have any idea. I mean, that's you got to wait till basically Louis Pasteur. Until Louis Pasteur, we thought that viruses and stuff were caused by what? This happened. Spontaneous. Malaria, right? Malaria. Or you're cursed. Evil spirits. Bad blood, right? See? You had to be purged. I'm glad we didn't live in that era. In any case, this is a huge deal, and we have to look at it within this context. Because if you look at, well, we're going to see more. 32. That evening after sunset, people brought to Jesus all the kekos. Now, we translate that sick. It doesn't mean sick. Kekos, and I think I gave you this word. Kekos means bad, physically or morally. It literally means worthless. Worthless. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the worthless and diozomainai, those that were controlled by demons, those who had unexpurgated, uncathartatus, akathartos pneuma. Now this puts a different light on it, right? Before we want to be part of this group. You want to be part of this group? You're worthless. And you're demon possessed. The people that bring it to him, we'd say they're bringing the people that are, there's nobody sick here. These are the people that are from the homeless shelters, that are drug addicts, you know, that if you read in the paper today, they get their Social Security checks, they leave the things so they can share bedrooms and use drugs and alcohol until they run out of money, and then they come back. That's what they said on the front page of the paper today. Because that's what they do. Because why? In the viewpoint of the Greeks, they're worthless. It's not because they're ill. It's because they're worthless. We've translated this because we put into our modern mores. And we don't want to be part of those Caicos. I think that we would recognize better if we considered ourselves to be Caicos. But we'll see what Mark has to say about it. But they brought the Caicos, the worthless, and those had demons. In 33, the whole town gathered at the door. Maybe they all were worthless in Caicos, right? 34, and Jesus therapeuo. You know, we say healed, but we understand what healed means. We understand healing. In those days, they did not understand what healing, therapeuo does not mean heal. Therapeuo in the Greek means to wait on menially. I gave you this word as a word of the day. It says, Jesus healed therapeuo. Many who had, it's not various diseases, it's Caicos poikilos, nosos. Literally, worthless, motley maladies. And the alliteration is not intentional. Worthless, motley maladies. In other words, they could have been Caicos because, well, we know that those who were demon-possessed, right? Or that were, what does that mean in this culture? You might have had a fever. You might have been, like, had the flu and been sick, right? They believe that when you were, you know, this purgating thing, what does it mean when you're vomiting in their culture?
Oh, there's a demon in you.
Yeah, there's a demon in you. What does it mean when you have diarrhea? You're trying to purge the demons from your system. So when a person is said to be akartotos, a unpurged devil or demon or thing, spirit, means yeah, I have an unpurged spirit. It means you have not been able to get rid of this spirit. And that it needs to be purged because it is a, take your pick, God, Satan, or demons, right? I mean, put them all together. That's the point. That's who they're bringing. It says he drove out, he ekbalo, balo, to throw. Ekbalo means to throw away, to basically throw, ekbalo. He ejected many demons, but would not let the demons literally, aphemi lelo. They would not let them talk. Because they knew who he was. It says literally, we say because he knew what he was. It says literally in the Greek, edio. They recognized him. They recognized him. If they recognize, if the gods recognize you, it means what? You are a god. Now, he has not told us, I mean, Mark obviously at the very beginning told us that Jesus was the huios of Theos, right? Huios of Theos. He is a son of God, a offspring of God, okay? But he could be, in the Greek mind, he could be an offspring of Zeus or Artemis or, you know, take your pick, right? You got all these, right? But Mark is going to prove to us something very specific. And he's already started doing it. Because he already got rid of the curse of Zeus. And now he's getting rid of these demons, these demigods, demons, whatever you pick, take your pick, out of these people, right? And he's making the worthless have worth. Have worth. Because he is menially waiting on them. Now, there's a lot you can take from this. For example, we know that the early Christians met in the Asclepions. The Asclepions, the Greeks would bring people that were ill and sick, you know, cursed by the gods, right? Now, the Christians did not know about bacteria or viruses or anything. They didn't know why people were sick. Why did the early Christians believe people were sick? Because they were cursed by the gods. They didn't have any new, they did not gain a new viewpoint of medical science because they were believers. They believed this. When they stuck them in the Asclepions, though, what is a Christian worldview? What causes all this horror, illness, and the evil God stuff? Huh? Sin. Yeah. The sin of mankind. That's the deal. Whether you want to call it original sin, whatever you want to call it. Okay? The Jews did not believe in original sin. That's a late Christian concept. But whatever you want to believe it is, they knew that the sin in the world is what caused this stuff. So when the people threw their children and their mothers-in-law and their wives and their husbands in the Asclepion because they were dying of illness, what did the Christians do? We knew they did this. They went in and therapeuo. They waited meanly on the people. They fed them. They gave them blankets. They met in the Asclepions because
It was a safe place.
it's a safe place. Nobody else would go there except for the sick, right? And guess what? The Asclepions became the first hospitals. And the first hospitals in the world were created by Christians because no one would touch these people. And guess what? The children, the people, the mother-in-laws would hear in the Asclepions about Jesus, and they would go home and their parents would say, "Oh my God, you're well. You didn't die." And what would they say? Because Jesus. Because these people in the Asclepion fed me. They gave me a blanket. They clothed me. They took care of me. Right? They had no idea about viruses and bacteria. They had no idea about fevers. But they took care of the people. Yeah.
There's no reason to conclude that this is verification that Mark is writing that these were indeed spirits or demigods or demons or anything else. It's only the context historically that they didn't know of any of these other things. In other words, we as Christians cannot take this that Jesus actually cast out demons.
Why not?
No, I'm saying, but not saying that it is not a conclusion that can be drawn, but because they didn't historically at the time this was written, they had no knowledge of any of these microscopic things.
I don't disagree with you, but let me put it into this. What if we call the demon a virus? Or what if we call the demon a bacteria?
Again, with spiritual properties.
Because we have put a spiritual property on it. The Greeks would have said, what would the Greeks say? Is it spiritual? No! Because they really believe they're gods of Satan and demons. Are there really viruses and bacteria? Yeah. Is there really mental illness?
Yes.
Now what's the cause? Oh, that's a hard question. This is a huge question in the mental illness community to this day. Was mental illness caused by activities or behavior? Or is it just a chemical malady? There are cases where we see pure chemical malady. I mean, children who have mental illness that never showed any effect before. And yet we see many adults and even children whose activities led to their mental illness. It's a huge question. What is this? The Greeks in the ancient world called them gods of Satan and demons. We call them viruses and bacteria. The Greeks believed this was concrete to them, just like they believe pneuma is concrete. It's the unconscious breath. It's concrete. Unconscious breath is concrete. You see what I'm saying? We are too intellectualized because we want to get rid of our demons and Satan and gods by calling them bacteria, viruses, whatever, mental illness, right? Chemical imbalance. So, yeah, I'm just pointing out that when we put, we do not want to talk about demons. But we sure talk about bacteria. And whether it's a demon or a bacteria, they both can kill you, right? And both cause horrible things to you. I mean, I have been sick to the point where I said, God, let me die. This is terrible. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, can you imagine the viewpoint of the ancient world where they have no idea about, you know, what causes things? See? Yes,
Well,
ma'am.
when Jesus healed people, or like cast out the demons, or made the mother-in-law well, I mean, if you're getting over the flu or a fever, and maybe you're getting better, but you don't get up and wait on people, like, and when Jesus cast the demons out of people, there was a dramatic change in their behavior, dramatic.
Yeah. I agree 1,000%. And this is the point, you see, because whether it is concrete spiritual demons, you know, that we don't want to believe in, or concrete viruses and bacteria that we do believe in, right? They all cause us horrible things. And yet this guy, Jesus, and Mark, you know, I'm just saying, we can read this. I mean, our translations are cutesy. But the big deal here is what Mark is trying to show us, that he has the power over, we would call it, the natural world, right? He makes it all perfect. Whether you believe in gods or Satan or demons or viruses or bacteria. He is casting out those things which harm us from a physical, and by the way, Mark calls it spiritual. And you know, I don't want to get you too, you know, we want to think that the Greeks saw these as separate things, but they didn't, did they? Because they talk about the soma. The soma is all three together. So in the Greek worldview, can you separate these? Oh. So in other words, if the Greeks knew about bacteria, see, they have no idea that bacteria affected the sarks, right? They thought that the bacteria demons affected only the pneuma, right? Because it can affect suke, they would say. Well, very early in the morning while it was still dark, 35, Jesus got up and left the house, went off to a solitary place where he prayed. And Simon and his companions went to look for him. And 37, they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages, so I can caruso, cry out there also. That is why I have come." That is why I have come. And let me finish this last one. So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching, caruso, crying out in their synagogues and driving out, ekbalo, demons. Driving out literally. And the reason the word demons is used, because demons are gods. Demons are gods in Greek thought. He was driving out the gods. So, we want to read demons, but Jesus is literally going through all these villages and driving out the gods. Very important idea. Anyway, thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. Help us come back safe. In your name we pray, amen.